The festival of Megalisa was one of the most prominent religious celebrations in ancient Rome, devoted to the worship of Magna Marta, or Magna Martyr, who was also known as Cybele, the Great Mother of the Gods. The festival took place annually from April the 4th to April the 10th and was marked by a series of elaborate public rituals, games, music, and theatrical performances that reflect both the Roman adaptation of Phrygian traditions and the unique mythological themes surrounding Cybele and her consort Attis. Megalesia originated from the Roman reception of the Occult of Cybele during the Second Punic War in 2004 BCE, during a period of crisis. Roman authorities consulted the Sibylline books and were advised to bring the goddess's sacred black stone. Sacred black stone, believed to be a meteorite symbolizing her presence from Pessinus in Phrygia to Rome. The goddess was installed on the Palatine Hill, and a temple was dedicated to her in 191 BCE. From this point forward, Magalesia was celebrated as a former state festival, though its rites retained their exotic and ecstatic Phrygian character. The festival began with processions and ritual purifications. One of the most distinctive elements was the carrying of the sacred image or symbols of Cybele, often associated with lions, mountains, and tympanum, a large framed drum, through the streets of Rome. Music played a crucial role in the festivities, with flutes, cymbals, and drums used to create a frenzied and ecstatic atmosphere. This music, along with dancing and chanting, was associated with the ecstatic nature of the goddess and her myth. Central to the emotional heart of Megalesia was the myth of Attis, Cybele's consort, who died beneath a pine tree after self-castration and was later restored or reborn. A pine tree was cut and brought into the temple as a sacred symbol of Attis. The climax of the festival came on April 10th, often identified as the Day of Hilaria, a time of joy and renewal that celebrated the resurrection or rebirth of Attis. In earlier days of the festival, mourning and grief were emphasized through solemn rituals imitating Cybele's sorrow at Attis's death. The mood then shifted dramatically to celebration, with feasting, rejoicing, and games held in honor of the goddess and her divine consort. Begali, the eunuch priest of Cybele, played a visible and often controversial role in the Megalesia. Dressed in bright robes and jewelry, they led processions, dancing in wild ecstasy, and sometimes engaged in acts of self-mortification. Their presence and behavior, which differed sharply from Roman norms of masculinity and priestly decorum, fascinated and disturbed many Roman observers, but their role was seen as essential in the proper performance of the cult's rites. While the more extreme Phrygian rituals, such as castration and ecstatic frenzy, were generally kept out of official Roman religious life. They were tolerated during Magalesia because of the festival's foreign and mystical nature. Over time, elements of the cult were increasingly syncretized into Roman religion, but Magalesia retained its distinct identity as a celebration of an Eastern mystery goddess who offered spiritual transformation and divine connection. Thus, Magalesia was not just a civic celebration, but a deeply symbolic religious event. It reinforced the power of the goddess, the mystery of death and rebirth, and the Roman ability to absorb and integrate foreign religious traditions into its own culture and spiritual life. The private rituals associated with the cult of Cybele and Attis, particularly those involving self-mortification and frenzied devotion, represented some of the most intense and controversial religious practices of the ancient world. While public ceremonies such as processions and music were sanctioned and participated in by Roman citizens during festivals like the Magalesia, the private ecstatic rites practiced by initiates, especially the Galli or eunuch priests, were far more radical, deeply emotional, and symbolic of spiritual transformation. One of the defining aspects of these private rituals was self-mortification. Participants, especially the Galli, would engage in acts of physical suffering to express devotion, achieving purification, or emulate the suffering of Attis, who in myth castrated himself and died in a state of divine frenzy. During specific ritual moments, particularly during the spring rites leading up to the festival of Hilaria, devotees would enter a trance-like or ecstatic state brought on by intense music, rhythmic dancing, fasting, and sensory overstimulation. This altered state of consciousness allowed them to become spiritually aligned with the narrative of Attis's madness, self-destruction, and eventual rebirth. The most extreme expression of this imitation was ritual castration. While not all worshippers practiced this, some male initiatives, particularly the Galli, would castrate themselves in a state of religious ecstasy. This act was believed to be a sacrifice of sexual and worldly identity, aligning the initiate with Attis, who in myth mutilated himself beneath a pine tree. The act symbolizes total devotion to the goddess and a rejection of earthly life in favor of spiritual union with the divine. Following castration, these individuals adopted female clothing, hairstyles, and identities, living as third gender or transgender figures within the cult, which further set them apart from the normative Roman civilian body. Other acts of self-mortification included whipping oneself, striking the body with swords or knives, or enduring other forms of physical pain during rituals of mourning and renewal. These actions were not seen as punishment, but as purifying and transformational experiences that mirrored the suffering of spiritual resurrection of Addis. Blood in this context was considered sacred and regenerative. The blood spilled during these acts was thought to cleanse sins, grant rebirth, and bring the participant closer to the divine mysteries of life and death. Alongside physical acts, the frenzied devotion of the cults was sustained by ritual music and dance. The pounding of drums, the shrieking of flutes, and the clashing of cymbals were used to overwhelm the senses and facilitate ecstatic states. Particular participants would dance wildly, sing hymns, and cry out in joy or lamentation. In these moments of religious ecstasy, devotees believed they could experience a direct encounter with the divine, particularly with Cybele herself. These ecstatic rites were seen as a way of to transcend the limitation of human body and mind, offering glimpses into the eternal cycles of nature, death, and rebirth. These private rituals, while crucial to the core spiritual experience of the cult, were kept separate from Roman civil religious life. Roman authorities tolerated them only as long as they remained outside the formal political and military structures of Roman identity. Despite this separation, the cult of Cybele and Addis remained a powerful presence in Roman spiritual cultures, particularly among marginalized individuals who found in it a path to transcendence, transformation, and spiritual liberation through suffering and divine communion. The symbolism of being enthroned and flanked by lions in the context of the cult of Cybele and Magna Martyr, or Great Mother, is rich in meaning, drawing an ancient Near Eastern iconography, mythological motifs, and religious metaphors to communicate divine authority, dominion over nature, and transcendence of chaos. Cybele is often depicted seated on a throne between two lions, either resting beside her or yoked to her chariot. These lions are not merely decorative, they serve as powerful symbols of the wild, untamed forces of nature and the boundary between civilization and the primordial world. In enthroning herself among lions, Cybele is visually represented as a deity who has subdued these forces, not by destroying them, but by harmonizing with them. This signifies her majesty over the natural world and the instincts of the animal realm.